as I mentioned, the deadliest catch is almost primarily occupied entirely by men. The show really participates in Western male patriarchal hegemony. Men value and judge work, their ability to do the work, their attitude about the work, what they actually produce. That's all valued and judged as a part of their masculinity on the show. Um, many men come on the show and fail. It's an incredibly taxing job. It's called the deadliest catch because many people die uh, per the number of people actually doing this job. Navy SEALs have come on the show, athletes have come on the show, and not necessarily as a show, right? They've come on to do the job that happens to be filmed as part of a show, and they've failed. Their bodies can't hold up. That kind of failure is implicitly and explicitly coded as feminine. Women have also tried to do the job and failed a number of times, but really strong, traditionally coded as powerful men have been unable to do this job successfully. The men engage in struggles over power, who's in charge, they yell at each other, they fight. Again, very indicative of what we would think of as traditional masculinity. There's a certain hazing that goes on when new men are added to the boat. So that's also part of what we would think of as traditional male patriarchal hegemony. Um, as I mentioned, the show itself is involved in traditional masculinity. Um, Almost universally white men. There are some non-white men, but not many. They compete with each other. Who can do the most X? Who can do the most Y? Um, they are working towards a unified goal. They are not supposed to be in competition. They're supposed to be part of a team, but that seems to be a part of it, that kind of competition as well. Um, and they reassert who's dominant. So in this particular image, you see the Northwestern, and in the center of the picture is the captain, and on these boats, being the captain is a particularly dominant male role that gets reasserted again and again and again. In general, gender on television is has had men depicted as heads of households and breadwinners, and that goes back, to television sitcoms. It is a norm that is reinforced again and again. Doesn't mean that's the reality, but many shows have bought into this, whether they're fictional or reality shows. Uh, as we've talked about on television, just generally, masculinity is portrayed as white, heterosexual, um, financially independent, uh, often middle class. So these are norms that have been reproduced again and again by continued portrayals that have these aspects. Um, when we talk about white masculine hegemony, it sort of um, implies that there's a fundamental difference between men and women. And I'm not saying that's true in reality, but the if we think about how hegemony works, it is buying into a fundamental difference between men and women. And there's no question that on a show like this, the fact that there's a fundamental difference between men and women is built into the show. It's not a fact in reality, but it is very much a fact on this show and on many other television shows. Women are not depicted in the kinds of roles that we see on Deadliest Catch across television. Though there are many exceptions, if we want to look at television in totality, many women have been portrayed as homemakers, caretakers, mothers, and you do see that in these shows when the men are not on the boats and they're back with their families. You see many of these roles emphasized for their wives and girlfriends and sisters. Um, so Buchanan talks about some of the features of hegemonic masculinity. So he says one is physical force and control, one is occupational achievement, uh, familial patriarchy is another, frontiersmanship is another, and then heterosexuality is another. And we'll go through each of these and talk about how Buchanan is operationalizing these in the context of this article. Relative to physical force and control, physical force and control is about power and ability. On this show, it's a constant battle with nature. So they are in the Bering Sea. If you don't know what you're looking at here, this is a crab boat that's covered in ice. So the water that blows on the ship immediately freezes and turns into ice. They call it ice spray, and they have to then take hammers and literally hammers and chip away at this ice because it weighs so much that it'll cause the boat to sink or tip over. So they've got to get rid of this ice every day. They need to be quick. These boats move from the cage that's going in the water is called a pot. The boat moves from pot to pot, pulls it out of the water. They have to dump the crab out of the pot, count the crab, throw the pot back in the water so that it can catch more crab. And they do this all day, all night, sometimes without sleep, without rest. The show is very much invested in the language of the male body. What can the male body take? What will break the male body? How the male body is able to deal with these really extreme conditions.